What happens when you give race teams almost no rules? You get the craziest cars racing on the wildest tracks, driven by the most fearless drivers, all while being cheered on by equally mental fans. This was Group B, the most extreme racing series the world had ever seen. So today let's learn about how such an insane racing series took over the world, and the tragedies that caused Group B to go from being the world's favorite motorsport to being the first to ever get banned. Racing has always existed. As Henry Ford put it, auto racing began 5 minutes after the second car was built. Back in the early days, racing was a simple point-to-point dash, getting from one place to another as fast as possible, through dirt, snow, whatever the world threw at you. Fans loved the idea, but there was one small problem. You'd only catch a glimpse of the cars as they flew by. So what was the solution? Purpose-built racetracks, so spectators could get a front row seat to all the action.
America lifts the curtain on a new sport, midget auto racing on a banked board track. It's a combination of the wall of death and speedway on four wheels as the gas buggy pilots blast their way round.
A handful of purists, however, still yearn for the adventure of racing across real roads, and that's how rally racing as we know it was born. It all kicked off in 1911 with the Monte Carlo Rally. Cars tore across mountains, dirt roads, and city streets. It was an instant success. Of course, Europe took a bit of a break from rallying in the 40s for reasons, but by the 60s, rally was back with a vengeance, more competitive than ever. At this point, the FIA, Formula One's governing body, wanted a slice of that sweet, sweet rally pie. So in 1973, they launched the World Rally Championship, or as it's better known, the WRC. When the WRC first kicked off, things were going great. The fact that these rally cars were based on real production cars made it feel almost attainable. It was also exciting. You had legends like Ford, Lancia, and Fiat battling it out on the world's toughest tracks. And thanks to homologation rules, we got some of the most iconic road cars ever made, like the beautiful Lancia Stratos. But despite all its potential, the FIA being, well, the FIA, kind of dropped the ball. They started to bog down the series with too many complicated rules and regulations. And the result? Manufacturers and fans alike started losing interest. The WRC simply wasn't hitting like it used to. So in 1982, the FIA decided to shake things up. They scrapped the existing rules and introduced 3 classes: Group A, Group N, and of course Group B. Group A and Group N was still pretty vanilla, being based on production cars with tight rules and hefty homologation requirements of 5,000 vehicles. But Group B, that's where things got wild. The FIA said and threw out the rulebook. Only 200 cars were needed for homologation, and if you wanted updates, you only needed to build 20 more. There were almost no limits on power output. Superchargers, turbochargers, you name it, all was fair game. Size, materials, all completely up to the manufacturers. And that's how Group B unleashed some of the most extreme race cars ever built. What the FIA had just done is create a racing fan's dream. Despite all the hype, the first season of Group B was, dare I say, a bit boring. The manufacturers had thought the FIA was almost bluffing with the whole no rules thing, and none of them were actually ready for such a seismic change. But by the second season in 1983, the teams were ready. They were dumping piles and piles of money into the development of mind-boggling cars, and 2 of them stood out as being head and shoulders above the rest. These 2 being the Lancia 037 and the Audi Quattro. On one side, you had the crazy Italians at Lancia, who decided to build a rear-wheel drive, mid-engined monster that looked more like a Lamborghini than a rally car. The Lancia 037 was sleek, light, and absolutely shredded the tarmac stages. Rear-wheel drive might have seemed like an odd choice for rally, but when it came to paved roads, the Lancia was unstoppable. On the other side, the Germans, not to be outdone, had cooked up the all-wheel drive Audi Quattro. While nowadays all-wheel drive is a no-brainer for rallying, back in those days it was generally too heavy and unreliable. But there's a reason why the name Quattro still rings a few bells. Audi had perfected the all-wheel drive system, allowing the Germans to absolutely tear up the off-road stages. And if you thought the cars were worlds apart, Wait until you hear about the teams behind them. Lancia were kind of the underdogs. They operated on a shoestring budget and had a playboy team boss at the helm. But what they lacked in money, they made up for in creativity and grit. Oh, and their star driver? None other than the legendary Walter Roll. Now, Roll was an absolute magician behind the wheel. Easily one of the most talented drivers to ever race. But he was a wild card. He wasn't interested in being world champion and didn't even bother to attend every race. As he put it,
I only do these 5 or 6 beautiful rallies and nothing more. I am not interested to win any more the World Championship title.
The Audi team, on the other hand, were well German, so you know, well funded and organized. So, in 1983, these two wildly different teams went head to head in one of the most epic championship battles in racing history. The Lancia 037 and the Audi Quattro traded blows all season long, winning 10 out of 12 races between them. And despite the Lancia being the underdogs on paper, they had a few, let's say, tricks up their sleeve, such as sprinkling salt on the snowy tracks to help their rear-wheel drive cars grip better in the turns. And guess what? It worked. Against all odds, the plucky Lancia team took home the manufacturer's championship. But remember when I told you that Roll wasn't bothered to do every race? Well, that ended up costing him the championship, with Audi's Hannu Mikkola taking the driver's title.
Hannu Mikkola's win with the revolutionary Audi Quattro heralds the arrival of a new era in rallying. The age of the supercar has arrived.
After that gripping season in 1983, Group B absolutely exploded in popularity and even surpassed Formula 1 to become the most popular motorsport in the world. And the brave guys and gals that piloted those ground-bound rocket ships became rock stars. Names like Walter Roll, Hannu Mikkola and Timo Solonen became household names. And amongst these legends was the trailblazing Michèle Mouton, perhaps one of the most successful female racing drivers in history. There were also rising talents, such as Henri Tovinen, the youngest driver to ever win a WRC race.
Hannu Mikkola and Arne Hertz get the champagne yet again.
A great person, you cannot say more.
The next few years of Group B were pretty cool, but didn't reach the excitement of the Lancia-Audi rivalry of '83. In 1984, Audi, for whatever reason, felt the need to upgrade the Quattro, and it looked absolutely epic. This allowed them to tighten their chokehold over the sport and secured both the drivers' and constructors' championship. The next year, however, Peugeot entered the conversation and was set to dethrone the Quattro, with driver Ari Vatanen piloting his fire-breathing Peugeot to what seemed like an inevitable championship victory. However, after a terrifying accident, the Finn sustained heavy injuries, leaving the championship wide open to his teammate Timo Solonen. By the start of the 1986 season, the Group B grid was filled with an absolute cornucopia of competing cars. My favorite of which was the Lancia Delta S4, a little hatchback that was somehow based on this ugly thing. Anyways, looks aside, the crazy Italians had managed to cram both a supercharger and turbocharger under the hood, because why not? This allowed the little S4 to rocket to 60 miles an hour in just 2.4 seconds. Like, do you understand how crazy that is? To put it into perspective, that's about as quick as a modern F1 car, except the S4 was somehow doing this on gravel. Fangirling aside, despite how absolutely loaded the grid was with amazing cars and drivers, this is where our story takes a dark turn. As I've mentioned a couple of times by now, Group B didn't have any rules, and this nonchalant attitude also extended to their crowd control measures. At the peak of its popularity, Group B was drawing in crowds of hundreds of thousands of fans, and without any restrictions on where they can and cannot stand, you got scary scenes like this. Despite how low-key cool this may seem, put yourself in the driver's shoes. It absolutely blows my mind that the drivers even managed to see the track through those thick crowds. It got so bad that Walter Roll said in order to succeed, you must think of them as trees. Like, do you understand how terrifying of a statement that is for anyone, especially someone piloting a 1,000-pound metal missile? It probably wouldn't surprise you then that teams started finding human hair, blood, and even fingers wedged into cars. It had become so grueling that the teams had therapists on retainer just to help their engineers cope. By now it should become pretty clear to you that the lack of rules balls to the wall action of Group B was becoming a little unsustainable, and unfortunately the world learnt it the hard way in 1986.
And there was the Group B rally cars, and they call them the Killer Bees because
Group B racing was the scariest version of rally the world has ever seen.
And these Group B rally cars like landed on people and killed a bunch of people, so they call them the Killer Bees.
When the rally circus made it to Portugal that year, teams and drivers alike didn't like how uncontrolled the crowds were, and the first incident occurred when Timo Solinen's car clipped a cameraman, absolutely decimating his camera. But the real tragedy unfolded when local hero Joaquim Santos took off in his Ford RS200. As the anticipation grew, overzealous fans crowded closer and closer onto the track, edging in to grab a glimpse of their local hero. As co-driver Miguel Oliveira put it, the road was completely packed. There were people and people and people. When Joaquim came out of a corner, one guy stepped out onto the tarmac, and so he had to make a correction. And when he made the correction and tried to come back to normal, the rear of his car went. He lost it. As a co-driver in Group B, the cars go so fast and the turns come at you so quickly that you don't even bother to look up. You feel the turns through your ass. But this time, instead of a turn, Oliveira felt a heart-wrenching bump, bump, bump. By the time the dust had settled, the scale of the tragedy was clear. 3 spectators, including a mother and her 11-year-old son, had been instantly killed, while another 32 lay seriously injured. And what infuriates me more about this tragedy was the FIA's reaction. The teams were not informed of the disaster that had just unfolded, and unknowingly they finished the stage. When word finally got around, many drivers and teams wanted to withdraw immediately, yet FIA President Jean-Marie Balestro doubled down, insisting that the rally had to continue to its conclusion, and he even threatened teams with serious penalties if they refused to. After the absolute horror show in Portugal, the final nail in the coffin for Group B came just a few weeks later in the Tour de Corsa in Corsica. Young championship favourite Henri Toivonen was driving an immensely powerful Lancia Delta S4 when, during a high-speed turn, he lost control and the car veered off the road, plunging down into a ravine. The fuel tanks ruptured on impact, and in moments, both Toivonen and co-driver Sergio Cresta were killed. A big reason for the fuel tanks rupturing was the lack of rules, allowing Lancia to skimp out in critical areas which left the fuel tanks unprotected. After this incident, Group B was terminated by the end of the 1986 season, and its successor, the even more insane Group S, was thankfully cancelled. But let's not end on such a sad note. Despite being short-lived, the spirit of Group B lived on in the sport of rallying. In the 90s and early 2000s, Subaru and Mitsubishi put on a show that was almost reminiscent of the Audi Lancia battles. And today, rallying is faster than ever. Thanks to the legacy of Group B, today's cars harness even greater speeds, but with a touch more restraint. The danger might not be quite as raw, but the excitement... Well, I'm pretty sure if you ask those guys, the excitement is still there. Just a touch safer now. Finally, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe to catch more epic automotive stories.